I wasn't able to be with her. And how I chose, there is no right way to deal with grief, but how I chose to deal with this diagnosis was if she was going to be all in on healing and getting better, I was going to be all in my business. I was going to match that energy. And so I was like, well, wait a minute. Like, how many people are not living fully because they're so worried about what other people think? They're so worried about things that aren't real. And so I started being braver and having more courage. And if she was going to be all in, I was going to not worry about what other people thought. And I had such a perspective that it was like, look, this is your life and you only get one. And it's time to be all in. Like if I'm all in, that was the energy that clients were bringing too. And so there was this amazing, gorgeous, beautiful ripple effect that came out of this very awful thing. And I really credit her with that shift. That was a big shifting point in my life. Hey, you leader, entrepreneur, business owner, solopreneur, whatever you call yourself, we know you're a visionary business builder, wealth seeker looking to combine a passion for doing good with leading consciously. It's time to shift from a traditional focus of pure wealth accumulation to one that integrates well-being and fulfillment. This is the Conscious Edge podcast, and I'm Alicia St. Germain, entrepreneur and coach. Along with my friend and wellness advocate, Jonathan Duggar, we're diving into what it means to embody radical self-acceptance while still evolving to lead with compassion and kindness. We're sharing our own experiences and expertise as we unpack imposter syndrome, perfectionism, procrastination, and all the other things that lead to burnout and keep you from experiencing pure joy, business growth, and maximum impact. This is a safe and supportive space to explore what it means to be a human creating wealth and building a business. You're here for a purpose, and it's time to shine your light. So here we go. Welcome back to the Conscious Edge podcast. I'm Alicia St. Germain here with Jonathan Duggar. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
So I'm really excited to have today's conversation. And it's been a long time coming. And I'm also really nervous about it.
Yeah. You just said excited. I was like, I'm not sure I would choose that word. Anxious fits me a little bit better.
Well, so anxious and excited are like we live right next door to each other. They're
exactly.
Very similar energies. So I choose excited. And the reason being that I think that it's very needed. It's a conversation that doesn't often get talked about, especially on a emotional intelligence business podcast type thing. And so I also want to offer, if you are new here, welcome. We are so excited to have you. Please, if you enjoy today's episode, hit the follow button or one of our other episodes, because I am going to offer a trigger warning today because we're going to talk about grief. And if you are in a place right now where you would not be comfortable handling emotions surrounding loss, you may want to skip this podcast or save it for a time and a place where you can process your own grief in a way that feels comfortable and healthy for you. So with that being said, we are going to dive in. So let me start with the reason we wanted to do this podcast. So Jonathan, you've experienced sudden loss in your life and loss that follows the natural order of things.
Sure.
And I have as well. I can think of at least 4 times in my life I've experienced sudden, unnatural loss. And this can all apply to, in the context that I'm talking about, it definitely applies to death. But it can also, as we were talking, it can apply to loss of job, loss of a relationship. It can apply to so many things.
Yeah. Almost any major life-altering circumstance
can come with grief.
Lead to grief.
And so I said to Jonathan, I was like, I'm noticing this in other people. I'm noticing people struggling with grief, not knowing how to handle it. And I think as a society generally, like, we don't want to feel negative emotions. You and I talk about that all the time, how things that are considered, and I'm using air quotes, negative emotions that are not at least neutral to happy, people are very uncomfortable with. And our emotions are such a powerful indicator and such a powerful tool when we tap into them, that it's really part of what we do is we are teaching people to honor all of their emotions. And I said, do you think grief has to do with a business podcast? What did you say?
It's a universal experience. So it's something we all find our own paths to navigate, and it affects all components of life. And the other part is having conversations like this, even though they are very hard. And I'm going to admit to everyone that this is a very challenging conversation for me to have. I think when we can share the hard stuff, it lightens everybody's load. And it lightens the way we deal with all components of our life. And when you can release that kind of energy that you carry around, whether it's false guilt or trying to be strong for someone else or being in a place of denial, all of which are common aspects of grief, when you release that energy, there are so many positive things that can happen. And one of the things that is often seen in the business world is when you change your focus and change your attention and own those strong emotions in an honest way without judgment, everything starts changing for the better, including what you do in your business, including the relationships, both personally and professionally. So I've even had clients where after let's call it a breakthrough happens, just they're not even aware of where the newfound sense of purpose and focus and energy for what they do on a day-to-day basis, where it's coming from. And I'll bring it to their attention. I'll say, well, when we release energy, we can reapply that somewhere else. And so I think that's one of the many ways that it applies to a business podcast.
Yeah. Well, I mean, here's why it was so profound for me. And this isn't something that I generally have ever shared publicly. I've talked about it in some of my small groups with some of my clients who I have close relationships with, and we've built that relationship over time, but I've definitely never talked about this publicly. So in the course of my life and business, I have had a best friend since I was in first grade. And we're probably going to do some editing through this podcast because we both want to give ourselves the space and time to communicate with you so clearly, and also do know that we're doing some healing ourselves as we're talking about this too. So I've had this best friend since first grade, and in, I guess it would have been 2020, or maybe it was 2019. I think it would have been 2019, right as we started the pandemic. My best friend called to let me know that she had a very advanced stage of cervical cancer and then passed on January 5th. So as this podcast comes out, it felt timely in honoring of her that I finally get to share this story. And that's one of the things that you talk about in mindful grieving, is that you said sharing the story is one of those pieces. So I want to make sure that you get a chance to explain that a little bit.
Yeah. So, we talk about mindfulness a lot in this podcast and in a lot of different aspects and formats, but there is an area of mindfulness that's directly related to loss and grieving. And just for brevity, I refer to it as mindful grief or mindful grieving. And there's multiple features of that, and I pared it down to kind of 7 elements that we'll maybe address some of those as we go through this conversation. But one of those is sharing the story and getting to a place where you can write about or talk about or express in some fashion the gift of the relationship, and in a respectful and compassionate way, share this strength that's built within yourself, share the challenges and the learnings and the strong emotions that are part of that process and part of that loss, and that are still prevalent. And that's why this is a challenging subject, because we're pulling back some layers that maybe we don't, that are not comfortable to pull back, that are painful. And so the sharing the story is a way to do that, and also often make connection with others, because as I said earlier, grief is a universal process. It is a universal journey that everybody experiences. So it is a way to connect.
So one of the things that I wanted to offer up is, as she's shared with me in 2019 that she'd been diagnosed, I wasn't able to be with her because of the pandemic. It was very early on into that experience that we all had. And so I wasn't able to be with her. And how I chose, there is no right way to deal with grief, but how I chose to deal with this diagnosis was, if she was going to be all in on healing and getting better, I was going to be all in my business. I was going to match that energy. And so the gift that came out of it was that for a long time, I struggled with imposter syndrome and worrying about what other people thought and not wanting to appear or be judged in some way. And when you have these experiences come up, it really puts into perspective what is important in life. And I thought about how many people, and one of the things, if you're not familiar with me, one of the things that I do is I help women get over things that they do that self-sabotage, like imposter syndrome, like perfectionism, things that where they worry about being judged and they're really not showing up fully for their life and business, and it creates a lot of burnout. And so what was happening was I was holding back on really sharing the message and really sharing, because I was afraid I'd come off as salesy and, or self-serving or all those things, right? And so I was like, well, wait a minute. Like, how many people are not living fully because they're so worried about what other people think? They're so worried about things that aren't real. And so I started being braver and having more courage. And if she was going to be all in, I was going to not worry about what other people thought. And I ended up having some of the best times in my business that I had had up until that point, financially even, purely because I wasn't afraid to tell people. And I had such a perspective that it was like, look, this is your life and you only get one. And it's time to be all in. Like, if I'm all in, that was the energy that clients were bringing too. And so there was this amazing, gorgeous, beautiful ripple effect that came out of this very awful thing. And I really credit her with that shift. That was a big shifting point in my life. And then when she passed, I grieved hard. I grieved harder, I think, than I've ever grieved in my entire life. I didn't know I could hurt to the depths of my soul that I hurt. And at the same time, I kind of adhere to this belief, like there's these people who leave this earth far too young, before their time. And I think everybody on this planet serves a purpose in someone else's life. And when you've completed your mission, you don't have to stay anymore. And for me, she was such a gift. And I know that what I'm doing in this world is my purpose and my calling. And so I wish that she didn't have to pass for me to wake up to how important what this little tiny little piece I do in the world is, but it really did help me do that. And part of me feels really uncomfortable and selfish, but it's like a real honoring of her. Like, exactly. Oh, of course you're making her death about you. But that's not what I mean. It's more about, it helped me show up more for the mission. And
that's a good way to put it.
Someone gave this to me. I actually picked it by accident. These women, I was at a retreat and they pulled these cards together and they just had everybody randomly pick a card. They're actually greeting cards. And they had everybody randomly pick these greeting cards. And the one that I got, not knowing what was on it, was this statement by, I guess it's must be lyrics from a Chris Stapleton song. And it says, "Angels come down from the heavens just to help us on our way, come to teach us, then leave us, and they find some other soul to save." And I really think that she served her mission, because my soul, that was the point where I felt that I was starting to step into my soul's calling in a way that I had never embraced it before. It became not about me. It became about doing as much good in this world as I could do and to help as many people as I could. And I never shared that before. I never posted it on social media because I felt like maybe it wasn't mine to share. I didn't want to take anything away from her family. I worried about people saying, "Oh, she's just doing that for attention," which I hear people say. But being someone who has, when I lost a pet of mine, like the dog Harvey was the dog that all of the dogs will always be compared to. And that was prior to Anne-Marie passing. And I did post on social media because I guess maybe I felt like that was mine to share because he belonged to me. And I got such an outpouring of support and I felt so alone in my grieving that being able to post that and honor what an amazing pet he was and all the outpouring of support and people who shared their pets that were the one, and you shared with me about Mocha.
Yeah.
And I made a vow, like I will never pass one of those posts from someone. I don't care if they're looking for attention or not. I have no way of knowing why they're posting that, but I will always offer my support because of that experience. So I have not shared this with anybody real publicly, but I do see so many people hurting. And I felt like it was time to give a different spin of what someone's life here on earth could look like and how you could use that to do really amazing things, to take that spirit and that soul and amplify it.
Well, I think you bring up, talking about that sort of diversity in how you experience grief in two different circumstances and how that presented and what it brought and what it continues to bring in the form of gifts and in the form of challenges. Unfortunately, we have in our culture some real myth and stigma around grief. And we have a lot of ideas that, in my mind, are just almost pathological in terms of how we're supposed to experience grief culturally. And many people carry that kind of messaging and use it when they're talking to someone that has experienced loss. And it comes from a good place. Like they're trying to be helpful and trying to be useful in some way. But I think we all can acknowledge that statements of, when someone makes a statement about, well, they're in a better place, or it's so great, you should focus on the fact that they're no longer in pain and things like that. There's truth in those statements, but they come from this misconception that grief is a problem to fix. And if we can really start owning and being honest that grief is a process, yes, but it's something that never goes away. How we experience it on the day-to-day may change, but it never goes away. The pain may lessen over time, but the loss is always there. The hole in your heart is always there. So when we can get to a place of owning our own unique way of navigating that process, it creates a lot of freedom. And like you're talking about with channeling that restructuring a priority into your business, that's a good example of what I was talking about earlier in terms of freeing up energy and applying it in a different way. And I mean, what an amazing honoring of your friend that her passing had such positive impact in the midst of all the pain. You know, that's the part that is challenging for me to even verbalize. And by the way, I'm one of those people that I cannot experience strong emotion and talk at the same time. I'm always very amazed at people that can do that, but I am not. So fortunately, we've got good editors. Like Elisa said, we may have to take that space for a pause. But just when you said that about, because I on some level knew the depth of the emotion that you were experiencing after her loss, and to know that you could channel the gift that she gave you in that in such a positive and impactful way that is still having effects and is still growing and manifesting is just, it's amazing to me and just very encouraging. So I'm glad you felt ready to share. Goodness. I'm glad you felt ready to share that, because it is, I think it's hugely important to, because I struggle with talking about the gift that can come from loss, because I don't want it to come across as disrespectful or unfeeling, or I'm not even sure. But again, that messaging that we're all brought up with plays through even now with me, even all the work I've done around this personally. It's like, I mean that in the most respectful and honoring way when I say that there is a gift in the loss. There can be a gift in the loss. There can be a gift in someone's passing. Now, I'm not saying we get to that right away. And again, there's no timeline to account for, but at some point when we can find the gift in where, even if it's something as simple as, you know, for the first time you reach out to someone that was also close to this person or also had been through a similar situation and make a new connection and lighten their load while lightening yours. That's the gift. So being able to acknowledge that, though, and grow that is so hugely powerful, I think.
Well, and I do think that out of tragic loss, when I step back and I look at the humanity that shows up in grief, and you can think about like the hurricanes that have recently come through, when someone passes and family comes together and supports each other. It doesn't always happen that way, but it can happen in really beautiful ways where if I had to put a purpose on death sometimes, or purpose on grief, it's to pull humanity together, to create connection. And it sounds utopian, but maybe if we all did that every day, maybe death wouldn't happen quite the same way.
Exactly. You know, I have seen a cultural trend in the past few years where instead of, you know, the old Southern tradition of the wake or the mourning, coming together to mourn in a public, collaborative way, which I'm not saying there's never any benefit to that, but when it's being reframed as we're getting together to honor this person or to celebrate, you know, instead of so-and-so's funeral, it's so-and-so's celebration of life. Mm-hmm. That just feels, and maybe this is just a personal thing, but that just feels like such a better fit of what a passing should be, you know, a transitioning should be. And it is just so interesting to me too, if I can get to that place of mindfulness without letting go of judgment and just be observer of myself or of others in similar circumstances. We have all those confusing messages around death, and if you're a person of, a specific faith that believes in an afterlife, there's a lot of conflict around death because, and you'll even hear somebody say it outright. It's like, well, you should be happy if your faith is that they live on or their soul lives on. You should be happy that they're in a better place or whatever it is. And it's like, okay, all of a sudden now there's a new guilt that this person is carrying because their faith isn't strong enough, or the two are completely unrelated. It's not. Pain is, and the pain of loss and the pain that they're not physically present is completely different than being grateful that their soul lives on. But we don't get that in this culture, or we don't recognize it and acknowledge it in a specific way.
And I've heard, and I believe that I've not only heard, but I've heard this expressed, that grief, the depth of the grief is kind of it's the opposite of the depth of love. It's like grief and love.
Yeah. Grief, the amount of grief you feel is the expression of all of the love that you didn't get to continue to pass on, and the amount of love that you continue to carry for that person.
For that person, yeah. And so it's interesting. One of the other things I wanted to make sure I offered up today was this idea that when someone has passed, and this is like when good people pass early, and like or not even good people, but or not even early, but just amazing people that you had in your life that at some point are no longer there and you miss them. And, I've experienced, my grandmother lived to be 101, 102, something like that. And her funeral, nobody was sad. It was the natural, we were sad. We weren't going to see her anymore, but it was this was the natural order of things. And look at all that she's created, all of these children and grandchildren. And it was just expected. But when it happens sometimes earlier than is the natural order of life, I definitely think that there's a much more unjust feeling that comes about, and it feels like you've been wronged, and you're like, it's just a funny conversation that I had with Anne Marie, and it was the last time I saw her, and I said, I need you to do me a favor, and she knew she was dying. I said, I need you to do me a favor. I said, when you get to wherever you're going, can you send a message back and let me know if Morgan Freeman is actually God? Because that's who he is in my head. And she laughed so wholeheartedly, right? But there's this very unjust, it's unfair. And I was like, I'm going to ask about this one. When I get to heaven, I'm going to ask about all these premature deaths. But I've come to a place where I have a lot of peace with it, because what I've realized is how expansive a person's impact becomes in death. They can have an impact in life. And I'm thinking of my very dear friend who lost her mom last March, very suddenly, very, very suddenly. And we didn't expect it. And she was an amazing human. Elizabeth was she always had time for you. And we went to her funeral, and it was one of those funerals where it was packed full of people, and people from all walks of life, people who she used to be employed by, who came states away. And her family was and she just always had time for you. She always had time to listen to your problems. She was very active in raising funds for the Humane Society in her area. And it really felt like when she left, it was a disservice to her grandchildren who were little, her daughter and her two sons, and just such a disservice that they would not have this woman in their life. And she was such an extraordinary human that you could see that every person that was there celebrating her was going to take a piece of her essence out into the world, and they were going to amplify it.
I love that.
I almost see it as this untethering of the soul from the body. Mm-hmm. And it goes out into all of these people, and they all take a little piece of her, and they go out and they do good. And one of the stories that came out of that was she had sold tickets before her passing to a fundraiser for the Humane Society. And they talked about her. And of course, she sold out of her tickets and was going to need more. And because that's who she was. And they ended up raising like something like $10,000 in her name at that charity event. And without that impact, would that have happened? And you don't know. But I really offer to people how when we lose these really good souls, whatever it was that they were becomes amplified in each person that they touched, because it wakes you up to it. It turns it up.
Yeah. The Hopi culture, they have a very healthy view of transitioning, I think, of death. And it's basically what you're describing. They talk about, they don't see death. There's no sadness around someone's transition. It's a party. It's a celebration. And the reason is because they see physical existence as limiting, and the passing changes to a place of unlimited. Mm-hmm. So you become part of everything. But there's an honoring of that person's life that you try and grow their legacy. So it's like you carry on certain positive aspects, like you repeat the stories, you tell the lessons. And this year was the 10th year of my dad's passing. We call him Pops. And my father was a college professor. And I still get messages from former students of him, from people that he influenced or had a positive impact in some way. And every time it happens, like it just happened recently, someone that I don't really know, but I had done a public post on Facebook, something that I made public, and they saw it and recognized my last name. And so they messaged me and asked me if I was related to my dad. And so, yeah, we had that little conversation. Anyway, they just told me a story about when they were a student and they were a horrible math student, and basically how he changed their life. And that change continued until now, because they gained confidence and they finished school, and they never thought they'd be able to finish school. And anyway, it was just one of those things where it validates exactly what you're saying, that even so many years in the past, when that impact was made, it continues to grow and people continue to recognize it, and it can continue to be replicated. Like, so every time I get to talk about my dad, I try and reference pieces of the story that others can relate to, because he was so good at that. He was so good at relating to all kinds of people.
You lost him suddenly too.
It was a very short amount of time. He was diagnosed with a form of cancer. I believe it was October, early November, and then he passed the following August. Mm-hmm. So it was very sudden in a lot of respects. And that's one of those situations too, where I think he had just turned 70 the year he passed. And, and some of you young whippersnappers, that probably seems old. But in the framework that we were all coming from, that was much too soon. But of course, I think any time is too soon, whether it's 70 mm-hmm. or 107, in terms of going to miss that person. Mm-hmm. But, it's this around all of that. And I know we're getting close to time to wrap up, but there was a lot of mixed messages that were sent to me and to my family related to how we were supposed to grieve. And is it all right if I read the thing?
That's what I hope you do. And I want to say this one thing. One of the things that we're going to do, Jonathan has come up with all of the things that people say that are not helpful and how to respond. So we're going to link those in the full show notes. They won't be on the app that you're listening app's notes, because we have a limited amount of space that information can hold. But on the actual page where this podcast will live on the website at consciousedge.com, I'll make sure we link it. We're going to put that full list of things people say and how you can respond. And then also, Jonathan, it would be helpful if we posted what to say instead.
Okay. I came up with a couple of things that were like how to say to somebody that's just an acquaintance, something to respond, and then respectful and compassionate ways to respond to friends and family and things that really genuinely are often trying to be helpful, but they've been programmed in a certain way to say, this is what you say when, in those circumstances. So,
and I think before, because I want to end on what you have, but what I want to say to anybody who comes across someone experiencing grief, I think the biggest gift is to hold space for them to just have grief, not try to fix it, not try to make it go away, and some of the things that you were talking about that you say. And then also, because everybody grieves differently, I've made it a habit to kind of ask what's okay and what's not. Like I've reached out to my friend and asked her like, hey, I hope that when I message you, it's not the wrong timing, or is it okay if I wear this vest, or is that going to be upsetting for you? She goes, it is in my heart all the time. So it is always appropriate for you to say something. Other people are like, I don't want to talk about it. So I think it's really important to ask that person that's grieving, what is okay for you? How do I show up for you in the way that you want that?
Exactly. And that's what this piece that I wrote after my dad passed, and I'm going to try and get through this without losing it. This is about how we grieve and being okay with the differences in it. And that's where I was coming from when I wrote this, because someone was carrying a lot of guilt around not grieving appropriately, which is ridiculous and comical to me. But it's how a lot of us feel because of things placed upon us by others quite often. And what I just recognized recently is that I also wrote this for me because I was carrying some of that too. So here we go. Grief is incredibly personal, individual, and very specific. When someone tells you how to grieve, you try and be nice. You try and smile and nod, but it's okay to know within yourself, or even say it out loud, that what you said does not fit. What you think I'm supposed to do is not mine. It does not apply. It does not apply to me right now. You grieve how you grieve. It's not time specific. It doesn't look the same for anyone. It's up and it's down. It's backwards. It's forwards. And it's definitely inside out. This is between you and what you believe and know to be true, and the focus of your loss and how it impacts your heart. Don't apologize to anyone. Cry if you need to cry. Rage if you need to rage. Withdraw if that's what you want to do. And don't feel obligated to hurry up and pick yourself up and put yourself together. You'll get there when you get there. You'll get there in your time. And there will come a time when not every waking or dreaming moment feels like a hole in your heart, feels like a punch to the stomach, but it's on your schedule. And then you'll feel better, and then you won't. You'll have time when it creeps back in, and when it punches you in the gut and knocks the wind out of your joy and your progress. Don't apologize for that either. Never. It's part of the process. Instead, let those seconds, moments, days remind you of the love, the memories, the joy, and the loss. Grieve how you need to grieve. Wow. So that's the first time I've ever read that out loud, especially in a public forum.
Nothing like ripping the Band-Aid off. That was beautiful. And I think that that's all that needs to be said. We hope today's podcast helped you in some way heal. And we were talking about healing, but we know that you will always live with this on your heart. And that's okay. So with all that being said, I'm sending you so much love.
Be well, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Conscious Edge podcast. Make sure you subscribe and take a moment to be kind and share this episode with someone you care about. Leave a review to help us bring more compassionate leaders building businesses and creating wealth to the table. And for show notes, head over to consciousedge.com/podcast. This podcast and the linked materials are presented solely for general information, educational, and entertainment purposes and should not be taken as personal or medical advice or any kind of mental health treatment. Please consult a medical or mental health professional if you feel you need such services. Please be advised that all investing and entrepreneurial endeavors involve risk, and the use of the education and information on this podcast and linked materials is at the user's own risk.
This podcast is part of the Sound Advice FM network. Sound Advice FM, women's voices amplified.